used by courts to identify murder victims whose faces have rotted away.
These tissue thickness markers, the thicknesses have been determined by studying large numbers of people. Now, these are thicknesses that we will not exceed as we work. These are our controls. These keep us from getting carried beyond scientific accuracy.
They call themselves scientists and archaeologists, and to me, they're almost like a grave robber, a person that can disturb something that shouldn't be disturbed. And that's breaking the hearts of my elders, because they continue to tell them, no, leave them alone. Leave them lie as they were.
What we're doing now is putting 21 facial muscles. The slit in that eye has been determined by a small groove in the inner edge of the eye socket and a small bump on the lateral edge of the eye socket. Stretch it in. And as we do so, his eye begins to open. Now we're at the stage of laying in the skin. In this case, our muscle is the reddish-brown color, and the skin is this high-quality, soft gray clay. Well, when I first got a look at his completed face, turned him around, and his eyes caught mine, literally, I was really transfixed by it. And I really got a sense of a man who was about to speak to me. The peopling of the Americas was not a singular process. The first people coming in did not come as a single wave of very clearly Siberian-type people, but rather it was a much more complex, ongoing process that may have begun with this early Eurasian Homo sapiens. To bring up that fact has really created a firestorm that I've found myself in the middle of.
Chatters was to find that even the forensic reconstruction would fan the flames of controversy as Kennewick Man hit the headlines across America. The battle for the bones has become highly political, reaching US Congress. Jim Chatters has been accused of attacking Indian rights and creating a racist icon out of Kennewick Man.
To call it a racist icon is, I think, to attempt to draw attention away from the story it tells. The fact that there seems to be evidence not only in Kennewick Man but in the other Paleo-Americans in North and South America that these early people are different from them seems to be very, very threatening to them. And so they're willing to say, well, you're a racist because you're bringing up an issue that we're not happy with. And it's the easiest way to silence someone is to call them a racist or a child molester. Today we have a politics that says, oh my God, you shouldn't say these things about the past, or you shouldn't be able to research the remains of past people in the Americas for political reasons. But what happens in future generations when that politics is gone and all the skeletons that once told the story of those people are also gone back in the ground and destroyed by natural soil processes?
Many deny it, but underlying the controversy is the Indians' fear that their rights and their land are under threat.
If it turns out that the American Indians were not the first inhabitants of this continent, I understand that there would be individuals who would want to take advantage of that, particularly financial interests, people who may wish to interfere with various treaties, with land usage, hunting, fishing rights, whatever. I don't think it has to be that way. As far as I'm concerned, the agreements and treaties with the Indian nations don't necessarily revolve around their being here first. It simply revolves around them being here, in fact, when European people showed up this time.
I think the proper thing to do is to go to these tribes and say, what stories do you have about ancient times? Were there strange people here? Now, if you go down to Nevada in the Great Basin, the Washos and other tribes have stories of red-headed, tall people that came through their territory. And so you have to say, who were the red-headed, tall people? See, that's a basis where you take the Indian memory and now you turn to science and you say, let's both solve this problem. But these scholars don't ask those questions and they don't work with Indians. They want to be the first people to say, I discovered all this. Well, that's an adolescent attitude. Now, how does any scholar in the world know who was here even 500 years ago? They don't. It's pure speculation.
New discoveries are bringing new speculations. It's now thought one group of early Americans could have come direct from Europe across the Atlantic on an ice bridge. Another group could have come from Eurasia via Japan across the Pacific. Jim Chatters believes the skull looks strangely like the Ainu, the mysterious narrow-skulled race still found in modern Japan. Other ancient Americans appear to share this look, like one found in Spirit Cave, Nevada.
You take a skeleton such as the Spirit Cave male, and if you take measurements on him and ask how he fits in terms of world populations, one of the things that you'll find is that he falls outside the range of all modern groups. He's very different. But if you force the question and said, well, who's he most like? What you would find is that he actually classifies closest to the Ainu. Right now, we don't know whether Kennewick will fit into an Ainu type of population or not. That's something we need to look at. At this point in time, we truly don't understand where these people are coming from.
But Kennewick Man still can't help the scientists with their inquiries. Early in September 1996, Army lawyers ordered the coroner to transfer the main skeleton to Battelle, a government lab where he'd be guarded by the Corps of Engineers. Till the Army released him, stalemate. No reburial, no tests. And after 2 years of legal action, he's still there.
It's a little over a mile from here. The bones are very close right now. And it's really very frustrating to have them at arm's reach and not be able to touch them. I was even permitted to go in as a representative of the plaintiff scientists to look at where they were being housed and even the containers they were being kept in, but not to look at them, not to actually see the bones or to inspect the condition they were being held in.
This medicine is called Petitchouet, and I'll be lighting it on behalf of the Ancient One. Right now, the Ancient One, his soul is wandering this earth until the time that a decision is made to put him back into the ground.
Then in July 1997, astonishing news. Under pressure from religious groups, the army had secretly been letting them right into Battelle to comfort the spirit of Kennewick Man.
The remains were being kept in a simple white wooden box. We saw little cedar fronds or branches sort of lying in there, and it looked like they were kind of interlaced through things a bit, you know, under some things and over some things. And part of me thought, well, that's wonderful, you know, the Indians cared enough for this individual, whoever he may have been, to honor him by some right out of their traditions. But another part of me was a bit horrified because, and this might be good religion, but it's bad science.
The Indian tribes have been in there 5 times. These religious ceremonies entailed adding leaves to the box, even though some of the bags were open, so the moisture could have affected the bones, could cause cracking, splitting. They added ashes to the box, apparently burned cedar leaves or probably burned sagebrush into the box. That, if it's mingled with bones that are going to be sent for carbon dating, could potentially contaminate those. Any handling that's done can break off small fragments that are important to fitting pieces, particularly pieces of the skull, back together so that adequate measurements can be gotten. There's a great deal of risk involved here.
It's a bizarre story. It gets more bizarre, it seems, every day. The Kennewick skeleton has been apparently contaminated so that we're not really certain that if we analyze the material, that the DNA that we extract from that material is from Native Americans who have handled the bone and contaminated the bone, or from Kennewick itself. Our opinion is that the material that we have now in my safe is the only uncontestable material known to be from Kennewick.
But whatever these samples could tell the world will remain a mystery as long as testing them is a criminal offense. Things went from bad to worse for the scientists. Late in 1997, Jim Chatters found what could well be another piece of Kennewick Man, but it seems the army lost it.
I found a small rib fragment, very distinctly human. And that bone was whisked off to Battelle as well, but it wasn't kept with the rest of the Kennewick skeleton. It ended up being kept outside the secured area with the skeleton, and ultimately was taken out and reburied by the Indian tribes. And it wasn't even scheduled to be reburied. They actually picked it up and carried it off without permission.
Spring 1998, catastrophe for the scientists. The Army Corps of Engineers finalized controversial plans to protect the Kennewick site by covering it with rubble. Jim Chatters and his colleagues protested, and Congress drafted a bill forbidding it. The engineers are thought to need Indian cooperation and goodwill, as they have a munitions dump on a local reservation. Whatever their motive, backed by the Indians, the Army went ahead before the bill could become law.
Skeleton was revealed by virtue of erosion processes in the first place. To prevent additional erosion of that terrace area, it was deemed necessary and appropriate to do site protection to forestall further erosion by the rising and falling effects of the river here in the area. Folks were describing basically that we would do something tantamount to the sort of dive bombing the site with material. Quite the contrary. The plan that we had in place was for soft placement of material.
We have a choice to care or not care. The ones underneath the ground, they don't have a choice anymore. That choice is gone from them. For us to desecrate these individuals like this, to study, or for whatever reason to further someone else's goals is not correct.
They've dumped in tons and tons of this rock right on top of where the last vestiges of Kennewick Man's skeleton lay. Those pieces of bone, those little fragments, are in fine mud, and these rocks will ultimately crush them. And they call it soft replacement technology. They've piled in tropical carbon in these coconut logs, coconut fiber matting. It's going to rot, and it will filter down into the soil and impede our ability to get accurate radiocarbon dates on that soil. They've done exactly what the Indians have wanted them to every step of the way. It's a farce. If it weren't so damaging, it'd be funny. It's like a Monty Python movie. Everything is out of place. Everyone is doing something other than what you would expect a normal human being to do.
Kennewick Man still hasn't found his final resting place. His future and that of American archaeology depends on the outcome of the million-dollar court case that's already gone on 2 years.
Much Native American material equally important as Kennewick has not been accessible by us because various museums are waiting to find out whether or not the courts will require them to return the material. If the courts decide we must return the material, then all of the skeletal material in the collections and museums around the country will never be able to be studied for DNA analysis.
Archaeology of the kind that is totally intrusive into people's lives or culture or religion should not be allowed to begin with. I mean, whoever gave a select group of scholars the right to intrude on all kinds of communities and say, this is who you are and this is what we're going to take? You check the U.S. Constitution. There's nothing in there that gives these people the right to anything. And what you have in this lawsuit is a question of whether the Constitution is going to protect the religion of the Indians or the interest of a small group of scientists.
What's really at stake here is not just Kennewick Man. They're stripping all American Indian materials from museums. What's occurring is the entire history, all the physical evidence of the history of North America is being taken and shoved away back into the ground in a complex jumble that will never be interpretable again. It's the equivalent of torching the Library of Alexandria, because it is the library that documents the history of a continent.
This is Bangladesh, the former eastern province of Pakistan, which in December celebrated its 25th anniversary of becoming an independent nation. It's a country where history has come full circle, with the election in 1996 of a new Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, the daughter of Mujibur Rahman, revered by his followers as the father of Bangladesh.
Our liberation, it is not one day's matter. It's a long struggle. About 24 years, my father struggled for establishing right of the people. So without liberation, our people cannot get anything. That was his ultimate goal, that we must liberate our country.
It was in Sheikh Mujib's name that the Bengali people of East Pakistan fought their war of independence. Yet less than 4 years later, the most popular South Asian leader since Gandhi was gunned down on the stairs of his own home. Bangladesh is still coming to terms with the events surrounding Mujib's death and its own birth. In 1970, a huge cyclone and tidal bore smashed into East Pakistan. Hundreds of thousands of people died, attracting sympathy from all over the world. But the Pakistan government's own relief effort was seen in the province as too little, too late. The president himself only visited East Pakistan after a fortnight.
People realized that if we remain within the framework of Pakistan during a time of crisis, a Pakistani ruler will not come and stand by our side.
This wasn't the best time for Pakistan's military government to be seen to be neglecting its eastern province. The country was about to hold its first fully democratic national elections. The main political leader in the east, Sheikh Mujib, was demanding regional self-rule for East Pakistan. A Mujib victory could change the shape of the country forever. Pakistan had been created in 1947 as an independent nation for India's Muslims. Millions migrated there. But as the Muslims were historically concentrated 1,000 miles apart in the northwest of India and in East Bengal, the country which emerged consisted of two separate wings. West Pakistan and East Pakistan shared a government and a religion, but not much else.
Well, language was one of the main differences, but then there was the differences in food habits, clothing, and the way of life in general. It is true that some of the provinces in what was West Pakistan were more homogeneous. They had fewer non-Muslims. But in Bengal, we had lived with the Hindus, a larger number of Hindus for a long time, and there were common exchanges. So this is also seen as one of the differences. I mean, the Muslims of West Pakistan would look down upon the Muslims of the East as not being true Muslims.
From the appointment of Jinnah as Governor-General in 1947, Pakistan's power base lay in the more developed West. However, more than half the country's population lived in the East. In a speech the following year at Curzon Hall in Dhaka, East Pakistan's capital, Jinnah announced that Urdu would be Pakistan's only state language. The Bengali-speaking audience was outraged. A lengthy protest campaign began. A memorial now marks the spot where, in 1952, police fired on a pro-Bengali demonstration, killing 3 students. The incident had a lasting effect on the East Pakistanis.
From 1952, they underlined their Bengali identity more than their religious one. And they thought that unless we can establish our Bengali identity and we can have more powers for the province, this independence becomes meaningless for us.
The Bengalis' desire for self-rule increased 6 years later when the army took control of Pakistan. the military was dominated by West Pakistanis, who in 1965 embarked on a costly war with India over the disputed territory of Kashmir. Although the fighting took place in the west rather than the east, the whole of Pakistan was expected to foot the bill. East Pakistan itself was provided with little defence against India, which surrounded it on 3 sides. Instead, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bhutto reassured the East Pakistanis that China would have protected them.
The 1965 war with India was something of a watershed. The people argued that if the defence of East Pakistan then did not even lie in West Pakistan, but lay in China, what was the point of surrendering all these resources for strengthening the Pakistan army and thereby securing your defence? I think after this, the general sense of disillusion with one of the central assumptions of the Pakistan state was in fact universal.
East Pakistan now had a charismatic leader to voice its grievances. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a former student activist, had risen to become the leading politician of the province. His Awami League party had a huge following, united by a demand for Bengali self-determination.
Do you think that Bengal can ever be economically self-sufficient?
Not only self-sufficient, Bengal can give helps to others. Don't you know the history of Bengal? In the day when the British government occupied Bengal in 1757, one businessman of Bengal could have purchased the London city.
Mujib devised a programme for the East and West wings to become self-governing units in a federation of Pakistan. This became the Awami League's manifesto. Crucially, each unit was to have control over its own economy, including how much money it gave towards the federal defence budget.
Obviously, the problem was that the West would have said that we want this level of defence expenditure to meet this threat. And East Pakistani would have said that no, we don't think there is any threat. We are not subject to that threat, so we are not going to really contribute that much. So it had really become an impossible situation.
Just how impossible became clear when civil unrest erupted in Dhaka following Mujib's imprisonment on a conspiracy charge. His supporters saw this as an attempt to send Mujib to the gallows. East Pakistan students fought especially hard for Mujib's release. When the case collapsed and Mujib was freed, the students laid on a triumphant reception in front of a 1 million strong crowd.
And there, as the president of that meeting, and on behalf of the people of East Pakistan, I asked the people who were present, the man who wanted to give his life for the emancipation of the people of this part of Pakistan, I like to give him a title. The entire population, masses present in that meeting, raised their more than 2 million hands and gave me the permission. And I declared that our great leader, Sheikh Mujib, will be the Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib. That means friend of Bengal. Bangabandhu means friend of Bengal.
But while Mujib's popularity soared, Pakistan's President Ayub Khan was forced to step down in the face of increasing opposition to his regime. Ayub's successor, General Yahya Khan, finally agreed to call national elections for December 1970.
I think Yahya Khan's motives were that, well, we could give elections. No party would emerge with an absolute majority in the national parliament. And he himself, with the backing of the army, would then be the arbiters of the new democratic dispensation which would emerge out of the elections. This assumption was based on the false belief that there was enough opposition to the Awami League in the then East Pakistan to deny them an overwhelming majority, though I think they all conceded that he would win about 60% to 2/3 of the vote.
Yahya Khan had gravely underestimated the Awami League, which won a landslide victory in the east. This gave Mujib's party the overall majority in Pakistan's National Assembly, which would draw up a new constitution for the whole country. Mujib's victory was Yahya Khan's nightmare. and it would lead to the greatest crisis in South Asia since partition. Urgent political meetings were held in Dhaka during the first few weeks of 1971. Mujib was visited by both Yahya Khan and Bhutto, the former foreign minister whose Pakistan People's Party had won the most seats in West Pakistan. But Awami Leaguers would still outnumber Bhutto